This chapter of the book focuses on dialogue and encounter for global poverty eradication. And we're looking at this theme from a global justice perspective. This chapter, in fact, evaluates Pope Francis' teaching in the 6th chapter of the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which dwells on dialogue and encounter as a means of building a more just and a healthier world. Pope Francis is calling humanity to imagine a borderless world, a world where there's possibility of encounter, a world where there's possibility of friendship as a way for moving society forward, a society that is healthier, that is more just, and that is life-giving. This encounter and dialogue that Pope Francis speaks about is not only interpersonal, but also a global and international one, which is an encounter of nations in the promotion and establishing of global justice in a borderless world. In addition, Pope Francis particularly refers to the power and importance of kindness, which is an attitude that can be adopted by nations, especially richer nations, toward those nations that are not so fortunately as rich as they are, of nations that are poorer. Powerful nations should have toward weaker nations, so that they use kindness as a star shining in the midst of the darkness that covers the world, that frees them. In the contemporary era where we live, nations are clearly not in dialogue. We live in a divided world, a world marked as the richer global north and the poorer global south. We live in a scandalous global jungle notorious for its inequality, injustice, unfairness, absurdity, and of widespread poverty amidst obscene wealth. We laud Pope Francis' call for dialogue and encounter, and argue for a dialogical and a relational approach to global poverty analysis. This approach views poverty as a consequence of divisive economic and political relations as effects of a failure in dialogue and care. This is an approach that encourages an analysis of the gap between poor regions and rich regions, and not only looks at the internal conditions of each country, but also draws attention to the balance of global power that influences the current global order through global institutions and rules that determine global economic policy in favor of interests of more powerful nations and business elites of those nations. Authentic dialogue and encounter among nations is what will heal the current global poverty and imbalances. What does it take to heal such a situation? Let us first of all look at what has gone wrong among the many problems of the world. Especially since 2008, global wealth has grown faster than population in 2018. It had exceeded 300 trillion. If divided equally, each person could have a share of nearly $40,000. Instead, 80% of humanity live on less than $10 a day. Half on less than $5.5 a day, and 10% survive on less than 1.90 a day. This is clearly wrong. As if to make matters worse, the 1% richest of the world or wealthiest of the world they are only less than 80, but they hold enough wealth equal to what half of the world's population hold as income. we're talking about 1%, less than 80 human beings hold enough income to equal the income that 4.5 or 3.5 billion of the world hold. This problem could be looked at from various perspectives. So if we are to promote Pope Francis's message of dialogue, of encounter, of friendship, it is a call for nations to look at the problem as it is, the inequality as it is, and look for solutions. One possible solutions could come from the perspective of global justice. And global justice will be built and realized by nations awakening to the fact that the globe, the world in which we live, is a community. It's a community of human beings who live together. That human beings could begin to think of the world as borderless. Borders are artificial, imaginary lines, but we use them to separate one another, and that has also now translated into the separation of the global south and the global north, richer human beings and not so rich human beings. This can change if we want. First of all, if we begin to look at one another as human beings, as individuals capable of relating one to the other, as individuals capable of expressing friendship, dialogue, and kindness to one another. And nations also, as I said at the beginning, can do that. They can see each other as units in the world that can engage in dialogue, in communion, in friendship, in support of the other. Yeah? So that's an attitude that individual human beings could take, but also individuals who live in nations could develop so that this becomes a global reality, an individual to individual sort of reality, but also a nation to nation or among nations reality. That comes from the development of a consciousness that takes seriously communion, that takes seriously friendship, that takes seriously harmony, that takes seriously the value and the virtue of kindness. Added to that is to realize that this global inequality that we are talking about, that hinders friendship and dialogue, comes from the imbalances that are as a result of global rules and institutions that favor injustice. So what we need to do to promote this dialogue and friendship, we need the support structure of institutions, of laws, and of various setups in the global arena that foster that dialogue and that friendship. In other words, it calls humanity, it calls nations, especially powerful nations who have the power to change the rules, to change the global laws of trade, of making medicines, of distributing medicines, of selling medicines, laws about how we govern ourselves, how we govern our tax systems, because these international laws affect each one of us. They affect nations. In the current scheme of things, they affect other nations very, very negatively, especially those nations of the global south. So what we need is to rethink these global rules, global setups, global institutions, so that whatever they do, as Pope Francis says, these rules, these laws promote kindness, they promote friendship, they promote a borderless world. We're not saying we do away with nations as we understand ourselves, like, Kenyans. I mean, we could go on with that, but up and above all, what we realize is that we are human. It's about humanity, that we can live together, so that if we see poverty in Kenya, if we see hunger in the Congo, and we are in the rich north in England or in the US, we show that compassion. And up and above that also, we set up rules that ensure that in our exchange, in our economic exchange, there is equity, there is justice, so that what we do, what we exchange is equally shared, is justly shared among populations and among nations of the world. But on top of rules, what it takes is countries to realize that they are capable of friendship, they are capable of dialogue, they are capable of showing kindness one to the other. Thank you.